I've always loved gardening. There's something therapeutic about digging your hands into the earth, nurturing life, and watching flowers bloom. After moving to my new house, I was eager to cultivate the overgrown backyard. It was wild and untamed, a small jungle behind my quaint cottage. Little did I know that the soil would harbor secrets I was not prepared to unearth. The first few weeks were blissful. I spent hours each day clearing weeds, trimming hedges, and planting new seeds. My neighbors were friendly, often stopping by to chat as I toiled away. They spoke fondly of the previous owners, an elderly couple who had tended the garden for years before moving to a retirement home. Everyone agreed that the garden was once beautiful, full of vibrant flowers and meticulously arranged plants. I felt inspired to restore it to its former glory. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I was bent over my latest project, a patch of lilies that had been choked by weeds. The warm air was filled with the earthy scent of damp soil, and I was lost in the rhythm of my work when I felt it. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if someone were watching me. I looked up and scanned the yard, but I saw nothing unusual. Dismissing it as my imagination, I continued digging. But the feeling persisted, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I shook it off, focusing on the task at hand. As days turned into weeks, the strange sensation didn't fade. I often caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows flitting between the trees or a figure vanishing behind a bush. Whenever I turned to look, I found nothing. I started to feel paranoid, as if the garden itself had become a living thing, harboring an unseen presence. One afternoon, while I was pruning the rose bushes, I noticed something odd. Half buried in the soil, I found a small, tarnished locket. Curious, I cleaned it off and opened it, revealing a faded photograph of a young couple smiling in a time long past. There was something unsettling about the image. The way their eyes seemed to follow me, filled with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. I tossed the locket aside, wanting to shake off the strange feeling that washed over me. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I heard a noise outside, soft but distinct. It sounded like whispering, drifting through the open window. My heart raced as I crept to the window and peered into the darkness. The garden was shrouded in shadows, the moonlight casting eerie shapes across the lawn. I saw nothing unusual, but the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a ghostly fog. Terrified, I closed the window and crawled into bed, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. Sleep eluded me, and I lay there, heart pounding, ears straining for any sound. The whispers persisted, ebbing and flowing like the tide. The next day, I decided to dig deeper into the history of the house. I visited the local library and pored over old newspapers and property records. That's when I discovered the truth. The previous owners, the elderly couple, had lived there for decades, but they hadn't just left for a retirement home. There were rumors, dark whispers about the couple's tragic fate. They had been involved in an accident, but no one spoke of the details. The whispers suggested something much more sinister. Armed with this knowledge, I returned home, a knot settling heavily in my stomach. I stepped into the garden, feeling the weight of history pressing down on me. The whispers were back, louder than ever, swirling around me like a storm. I tried to focus on my plants, but the air felt thick, suffocating. That night, as I lay in bed, the whispers escalated into frantic shouts, an unintelligible chorus that filled my mind. I shot up, heart racing, and rushed to the window. The garden was alive with movement. Shadows danced between the trees, and I could almost make out figures lurking in the darkness. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but as I pressed the call button, the whispers ceased abruptly. Confused, I stared out into the darkened yard, straining to see anything that would explain the sensation of being watched. That's when I noticed it. A figure standing at the far end of the garden, cloaked in shadows. My heart raced as I squinted to get a better look. The figure seemed to be watching me, unmoving, but I couldn't make out any details. I was paralyzed by fear, unable to tear my gaze away. After what felt like an eternity, the figure slowly turned and walked away, fading into the shadows. My heart thudded in my chest, and I stumbled back from the window, fear coursing through my veins. I knew I had to do something. The following day, I decided to confront whatever was haunting my garden. I armed myself with a flashlight and headed outside at dusk, heart pounding in my chest. I walked through the yard, the whispers returning, swirling around me like an angry wind. I felt drawn toward the area where I had found the locket and began to dig. As I dug deeper, I felt a strange energy in the air, electric and charged. The whispers grew louder, becoming an insistent chant, urging me to stop. But I couldn't back down now. I was determined to uncover the truth. Suddenly, my shovel struck something hard. I cleared away the dirt to reveal a small, rusted box, locked tight. My heart raced as I pried it open, revealing a collection of items. Old photographs, letters, and a small wooden figurine. Each item was coated in a layer of grime, but what struck me most were the photographs, images of the couple from the locket. Now they looked older, more worn, and there were new figures in the background, dark silhouettes that seemed to loom over them. The whispers crescendoed into a frenzied scream as I sifted through the items. I stumbled upon a letter, yellowed with age, written in a shaky hand. It spoke of fear, of something lurking in the garden, of a darkness that consumed the couple's lives. It wants us, the letter read. It feeds on our fears. We cannot escape. Panic surged through me as I realized the weight of what I had uncovered. The garden wasn't just a sanctuary. It was a prison, a place where something dark thrived, drawing in those who dared to dig too deep. I felt a chill race down my spine as I turned to leave. Suddenly, I heard a soft rustling behind me. I spun around, and the figure was there again, closer this time. Its features were still obscured by shadows, but the sheer presence of it froze me in place. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled back, heart racing. I turned and ran, my legs moving before my mind could process. The whispers rose into a deafening roar, their chaotic voices overlapping and echoing inside my head. I burst through the back door, slamming it behind me and locking it tight. My hands trembled as I fumbled to secure every latch and bolt, the suffocating fear clouding my thoughts. I paced the living room, trying to catch my breath. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. What had I unleashed? What had I awakened in that garden? The whispers didn't relent. Even within the supposed safety of my home, they seeped through the walls, faint but persistent. That night was the worst yet. The whispers were no longer just outside. They were in my mind, filling every corner of my consciousness. Each creak of the house sent my heart into a frenzy. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally in the dim light, and every glance out the window revealed flickering movements I couldn't trust. I couldn't stay. Days turned into weeks, and the suffocating darkness consumed every moment. I became a prisoner in my own home, avoiding the garden and barricading the doors and windows. Yet the whispers always found a way in. I felt the presence growing stronger, looming over my life like a dark shadow. Finally, I made the decision to leave. I packed my belongings in a rush, desperate to escape the madness. As I prepared to depart, I glanced out the window one last time. My heart raced, my breath catching in my throat. They were there. Figures stood in the garden, no longer fleeting shadows but solid and real. A crowd of dark silhouettes loomed among the overgrown plants, their faces indistinct but terrifying. Their eyes seemed to pierce through the glass, filled with a hunger that sent chills down my spine. I stumbled back from the window, the overwhelming terror flooding my veins. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed my keys, fled the house, and raced down the street until I reached the safety of my car. My hands trembled as I started the engine, and I didn't dare look back. The whispers faded as I drove away, but they didn't leave me entirely. Even weeks later, as I settled into a new town far from that cursed place, the memories haunted me. I tried to shake off the unease, but in quiet moments, I could still hear them, a faint echo at the edge of my mind. I had learned a hard truth. Some places are not meant to be disturbed. Some secrets are better left buried. That garden was more than a piece of land. It was a veil, a boundary between our world and something dark and insatiable. Even now, I can feel its presence. I know it's waiting, biding its time, for the next curious soul to wander too close. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip, a weekend getaway to clear my head after a grueling few months at work. I packed my gear, loaded up my truck, and set out early on a Saturday morning, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. My destination was a secluded camping spot deep in the woods, one I had discovered online, a hidden gem that promised peace and solitude. As I drove along the winding road, anticipation bubbled within me. The trees began to close in, their branches intertwining overhead, creating a natural archway that welcomed me into the forest. I felt my stress begin to melt away, replaced by the calming presence of nature. After about an hour, I finally reached the trailhead, marked only by a faded sign and a narrow path disappearing into the trees. I parked my truck and hoisted my backpack onto my shoulders. The air was crisp, and the forest was alive with the sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. I followed the trail, feeling the soft earth beneath my boots, the scent of pine invigorating my senses. The hike was refreshing, and as I trekked deeper into the woods, the sounds of civilization faded away, leaving only the natural symphony of the forest. I stopped occasionally to take in my surroundings, snapping photos of the stunning views and vibrant wildlife. The sun hung high in the sky, casting dappled shadows on the ground as I made my way toward my camping spot. After a few hours, I finally reached a clearing that opened up to a picturesque pond surrounded by towering trees. It was the perfect spot. I quickly set up my tent, eager to settle in and enjoy the beauty around me. As the sun began to set, I built a small fire and cooked a simple dinner, feeling content as I watched the flames dance in the twilight. As night fell, the forest transformed. The chirping of birds was replaced by the soft sounds of crickets, and the air grew cooler. I sat by the fire, basking in its warmth, feeling completely at peace. But as I stared into the flames, I began to notice an unsettling quiet settling over the woods. It was strange, no sounds, not even the wind. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination. I finished my meal, packed away the remnants, and sat back down by the fire, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. It was beautiful and serene, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to turn in early, crawling into my tent and zipping it up tightly. The silence outside was deafening, and I found myself listening intently to the sounds of the night. Just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it. A soft rustling noise coming from the edge of the clearing. My heart raced as I strained to listen. The rustling continued, growing louder and closer. I held my breath, fear creeping into my chest. Was it an animal? I tried to convince myself it was just a deer or a raccoon, but the noise felt deliberate, almost like it was circling my tent. I peered out through the mesh window, but all I could see was darkness. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No answer, just the rustling, now accompanied by a faint whispering sound. It was indistinct at first, but it began to form into words, echoes of laughter and whispers that chilled me to the bone. Panic surged within me. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, heart pounding. "Is anyone there?" I shouted, trying to sound brave. The laughter faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to pack up and flee, but I was paralyzed with fear. Suddenly, the whispering returned, louder this time. "Help us! Help us!" It was a chorus of voices echoing through the trees, pleading and desperate. I felt a chill run down my spine. I had to get out of there. Quickly, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, flashlight in hand. My heart raced as I swung the beam around the clearing, searching for the source of the voices. The forest loomed around me, dark and foreboding, the trees swaying in the night breeze. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky. The whispering stopped, and I was met with an eerie stillness. The air felt electric, charged with an unseen energy. I felt as if something was watching me, lurking just beyond the reach of my light. As I stood there frozen in place, I heard a faint sound, a child's laughter echoing from somewhere deeper in the woods. I turned toward the noise, my curiosity piqued despite my fear. "Hello," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is someone there?" The laughter grew louder, mingled with the whispers. "Help us. Come play." The voices beckoned, sweet and enticing, drawing me in. It felt wrong, but I couldn't help myself. I took a hesitant step forward, my flashlight illuminating the path ahead. As I moved deeper into the woods, the laughter faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. I felt a sense of dread settle over me, but I pressed on, compelled by an invisible force. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead, creating a canopy that blocked out the stars. I stumbled over roots and rocks, the darkness enveloping me like a shroud. I felt disoriented, unsure of where I was. The further I went, the more the air seemed to thrum with energy, vibrating with an unsettling tension. "Help us! Help us!" The voices echoed around me, growing more frantic. I felt a tug at my heart, a desperate plea that made me want to turn back, to run. But the pull was strong, and I found myself moving forward, deeper into the woods. Then suddenly I came upon a small clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated wooden play structure, overgrown with vines and moss. The sight sent chills down my spine. The sight sent chills down my spine. The laughter was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. It felt as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting. I stepped closer to the structure, my heart pounding in my chest. It was old and rotting, but remnants of children's toys lay scattered around. A rusted tricycle, a cracked doll. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me, the weight of the past pressing down on me. "Help us," the voices whispered again, now sounding mournful, as if they were trapped. The air felt heavy with sorrow, and I realized these were not just playful spirits. Something terrible had happened here. Panic surged through me, and I turned to leave, but the darkness seemed to close in around me. I felt a rush of wind, and suddenly the whispers grew louder, echoing through the trees, urging me to stay. "Help us. Don't leave." I stumbled back, heart racing. I had to get out of there. I ran, the branches clawing at me as I fought my way back through the forest. The laughter returned, echoing through the night, now mixed with cries for help that filled me with terror. I burst through the trees and into the clearing where my tent had been, gasping for breath. The fire had gone out, leaving nothing but glowing embers. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in around me, the whispers still echoing in my ears. Frantically, I packed my gear, my hands shaking as I stuffed everything into my backpack. I glanced back toward the woods, half expecting to see the figures of children watching me, their faces twisted in sorrow. But the darkness swallowed everything, leaving only the emptiness of the night. As I made my way back to my truck, the whispers faded into the background, replaced by the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I fumbled for my keys, nearly dropping them as I unlocked the door. I jumped inside, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. I sat there, breathing heavily, trying to calm my racing heart. The forest loomed around me, silent now, but the memories of the voices lingered in my mind. I had come seeking solitude and peace, but what I found was a darkness that would haunt me for years to come. I started the truck and sped away, leaving the forest behind. But even as I drove, I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on me, a reminder of the echoes that lingered in the woods. Weeks passed, and I tried to forget about the trip, but the experience haunted me. I did some research about the area and discovered that it had a dark history. There had been reports of children going missing over the years, whispers of a play area that was built long ago but abandoned after a series of tragic events. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled into something sinister, that the voices I heard were the echoes of those lost children, trapped in a place they could never leave. The forest held its secrets close, and I had unwittingly walked into its grasp. Even now, as I hike along familiar trails, I feel the lingering shadow of that night. I always keep an eye on the trees, half expecting to hear those haunting whispers calling out to me once again. The woods are beautiful, but they are also filled with echoes of the past, whispers that remind me to tread carefully, for not all who wander in the darkness find their way back. The day I moved into the old Victorian house, I felt a strange sense of excitement mixed with dread. The house, with its peeling paint and creaking floors, had been neglected for years. Yet it was perfect for me, a project to pour my energy into. I envisioned myself restoring it to its former glory, breathing life back into the decaying walls. What I didn't expect was to find a presence that would haunt me in ways I couldn't have imagined. My first week was spent unpacking boxes, exploring every corner, and slowly acclimating to my new surroundings. The neighborhood was quiet, dotted with similarly aged homes, but it felt oddly isolated. My closest neighbors were a good distance away, and while I liked the solitude, it also made me feel exposed, as if I were living in a fishbowl. One evening, as I was sifting through old paperwork left behind by the previous owner, I stumbled upon a dusty journal hidden in the attic. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, the handwriting shaky and frantic. Curiosity piqued. I began to read. The journal chronicled the life of a woman named Eliza, who had lived in the house decades ago. Her entries started off innocuously enough, detailing her daily routines and the joys of her garden. But as the pages turned, the tone shifted dramatically. Eliza wrote about hearing strange noises at night, whispers that seemed to echo through the halls, shadows flitting just out of sight, and a growing sense of dread that seeped into her life. The last entry sent chills down my spine. I can feel it watching me. I don't know what it is, but I'm afraid. I closed the journal, an unsettling feeling knotting in my stomach. I tried to dismiss it as the ramblings of a troubled mind, but the words lingered, creating an unease that settled deep within me. That night, as I lay in bed, the house creaked and groaned as it settled into darkness. I felt the weight of silence pressing down on me, punctuated only by the sound of my own heartbeat. It was hard to shake the feeling that I was not alone. I convinced myself it was simply the effects of the journal playing tricks on my mind. The following days were marked by strange occurrences. I'd hear soft thumps at night, like footsteps on the stairs, but when I investigated, I found nothing amiss. The feeling of being watched became more pronounced, a sensation creeping over me as I went about my day. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of movement in my periphery, just a flash, but it was enough to make my heart race. Determined not to let my imagination get the best of me, I threw myself into my renovations, spending hours painting and cleaning, trying to create a home. Yet, as I worked, I often felt a presence in the room with me, as if I were being observed. I brushed it off, focusing on my tasks. One evening, while I was painting the living room, I heard a soft whisper, a word or phrase I couldn't quite make out. I turned sharply, but the room was empty, save for the paint cans and brushes scattered around. My heart pounded as I tried to rationalize what I had heard, telling myself it was the wind or my imagination. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers intensified. They echoed through the halls, becoming clearer, forming sentences that felt both urgent and ominous. "Help me! Help me!" The voice was faint but persistent, creeping into my mind when I was alone. I tried to dismiss it as exhaustion, but the sense of dread was becoming unbearable. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered the house with a flashlight, searching for the source of the whispers. I moved through the darkened rooms, heart racing, illuminating corners that had remained untouched for years. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. As I reached the attic door, the whispers grew louder, more frantic. "Help me! Help me!" I hesitated, fear clawing at my insides. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit space filled with forgotten relics of the past. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight as I stepped inside, feeling a chill run down my spine. I scanned the room, the shadows twisting and turning in the corners. There, in the farthest corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A mirror old and cracked, reflecting a distorted image of myself. The whispers grew frantic, echoing off the walls. I stepped closer, drawn to the mirror, when suddenly the reflection changed. Instead of my own face, I saw Eliza. Her expression was one of desperation, her eyes wide with fear. She pleaded silently, her lips moving, but no sound escaping. "Help me!" My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled back, terror flooding my senses. The mirror was more than just glass. It felt like a portal, a connection to a past that was never laid to rest. I turned to leave, heart racing, but the whispers turned into screams, filling the attic with an overwhelming cacophony of anguish. I sprinted down the stairs, slamming the attic door behind me, locking it tight. The following days were filled with dread. I felt a weight pressing down on me, as if the house itself were alive, breathing, watching. I couldn't shake the image of Eliza from my mind nor the sense of urgency in her eyes. I began to feel an obligation, a compulsion to help her, but I had no idea how. Desperation led me back to the journal. I spent hours poring over its pages, searching for clues, for any mention of how Eliza might be trapped. The entries became more erratic as her fear grew, detailing her descent into madness, her isolation, and her conviction that something dark had taken root in the house. Then, a breakthrough, a mention of a hidden room in the attic. "The room beneath the stairs," she had written. "It holds the key. My heart raced as I realized the implication. I had to find it. That night, I gathered my courage and ascended the stairs once more. The house felt colder, the whispers urging me on. I approached the attic stairs, searching for any sign of a hidden entrance. I traced the edges, feeling for discrepancies, and my fingers grazed over the wood. Suddenly, I felt a slight shift. A panel clicked open, revealing a narrow space beneath the stairs. Heart pounding, I squeezed through, flashlight in hand. The air was musty, filled with the scent of mildew. Inside, I discovered an old trunk covered in dust and cobwebs. My hands shook as I opened it, revealing a collection of personal items. Old dresses, letters, and a small wooden box. As I sifted through the belongings, I found more photographs of Eliza, each one capturing moments of her life. But the last few were unsettling, images of her looking increasingly gaunt and hollow. The letters spoke of despair, loneliness, and a growing darkness that consumed her. At the bottom of the trunk lay a small ornate key. My heart raced as I realized it must be the key to the mirror. Clutching it tightly, I made my way back to the attic, whispering a silent prayer as I approached the mirror. The air crackled with energy, the whispers becoming a chorus, rising in intensity, pleading and desperate. I took a deep breath and inserted the key into the small keyhole at the base of the mirror. It clicked, and the surface rippled like water. With trembling hands, I pushed the mirror open, revealing a hidden passage beyond. The whispers turned into anguished screams, echoing through the darkness. I stepped through, determined to confront whatever lay on the other side. The passage led me to a dimly lit room filled with shadows and echoes of the past. There I saw Eliza, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. "You found me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What do I need to do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Eliminate the darkness," she replied, her eyes filled with a sorrow that pierced my heart. "It's feeding on my fear. You must confront it." Suddenly, the shadows around us coalesced, forming a dark figure that loomed over us, its presence suffocating. "Leave her be," it hissed, its voice coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I won't let you take her," I shouted, feeling a surge of defiance. The darkness recoiled slightly, but I could feel it tightening its grip, attempting to instill fear within me. "Remember her joy," I whispered to myself, recalling the laughter and love in the photographs. I focused on those memories, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. "You can't have her." With a roar, the darkness lunged at me, but I held my ground, visualizing the light that filled the garden when I first moved in, the warmth of the sun on my skin, and the joy of restoring something once lost. The shadows shrieked, retreating from my resolve. In that moment, I felt Eliza's presence beside me, a warm light enveloping us both. "Thank you," she whispered, her form becoming clearer, brighter. The darkness wavered, then dissipated into nothingness, leaving only a soft glow in its wake. I turned to Eliza, tears streaming down my face. "You're free," I said, relief washing over me. "Yes," she smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you for listening." As she began to fade, I felt a weight lift from my chest, the whispers quieting to a peaceful hum. I stepped back through the mirror, feeling the warmth of sunlight on my face as I emerged back into the attic. The journal lay open on the floor, the last entry glowing with a sense of completion. "I am free." The words were no longer frantic but serene. The following days felt different. The oppressive weight of the house had lifted, replaced by a sense of peace. I knew I had transformed the space, breaking the cycle of despair. The garden flourished, the flowers blooming brighter than ever, their colors vibrant and full of life. As I continued my renovations, I could still hear Eliza's gentle voice in the rustle of the leaves, a reminder that some spirits need only to be acknowledged to find their peace. I had confronted the darkness and emerged stronger, not just for myself, but for the soul who had been trapped in that house for far too long. In that Victorian home, the past and present intertwined, creating a sanctuary filled with light, laughter, and the promise of new beginnings.